Good afternoon. That was a tough act to follow. I am just so moved by that group. So I'm going to give you a little bit different aspect of what my opinion of a superhero is, and they happen to come with 4 legs. So let me walk you through a little bit about my theories and my life. So we know that when a new family, when they're expecting a newborn child, we know that every mother and father's hopes and dreams are for them to have a healthy, happy baby born with 10 fingers and 10 toes. And we know that ultrasounds really lend a good picture as far as what a healthy fetus will look like. Well, when I was born, my parents didn't get an ultrasound, and they got a big surprise with me. I was actually born without my right arm, and the doctors and the nurses, they tell me that we're in the delivery room, and my parents were shocked at what they received. And so from that, I was born with what's called amniotic band syndrome, which basically means that the fetus gets intertwined with the amniotic bands in the womb. So my father was very much a believer that his newborn had been born into a two-handed world. And with that, he thought to himself, I want her to learn how to ride a bicycle or drive a car or do whatever she wants to be able to do. And so at the time, in the early 70s, I don't want to give my age away, but he was very much a proponent to go and try to find some answers before the internet. And so he did a lot of research, and he determined that he really wanted me to try to get a prosthesis. Now, doctors at that time said, no way, she's too little, we're not doing that. But he persisted, and at 6 months, I was fitted with my first prosthetic device. And I was... I'm not that cute as some of the earlier baby pictures I think we saw. But they tell me that I started to learn how to pull myself up, and I started to crawl, and I started walking, and I started hitting all my developmental milestones. Now, I grew up in southern Florida, and it was hot and humid. And as most toddlers, I don't think I was a cooperative one. And I didn't want to wear my prosthesis. And so I had all kinds of rashes and skin breakdown, and it was very heavy, and the harness was cumbersome, and I just wasn't going to do it. But my dad was pretty persistent, and so he tells me that he thought to himself, well, what does every little girl love? Well, ponies, of course, right? So he got me riding at a very early age, and from there, my journey with horses really began. And little did I know how much horses were going to forever alter my life. So my parents selected, this was, in my opinion, superhero number 1. Popsicle was his name. He was a little black Shetland pony, and he taught me all kinds of things. First of all, he taught me, as I look back, fear less, live more. That was really what he wanted to teach me. And so my dad would often say to me, do you want to go for a ride? And I would say, yeah. And he'd say, well, then you got to go get your arm on. And that's really where the journey began. And so this little black Shetland pony, he really became a huge part of my childhood. If you know anything about ponies, you also know that not just was he a part of my life, but broken bones and casts were too. So he had these incredible brown eyes. He could lure me in, but also with a quick shot of his hind feet, he could give me a little dose of humility too. And so I really wanted to master this little pony. And he challenged me every single time I came in contact with him. But I'm going to tell you what, that pony, that Popsicle, he gave me grit and heart and perseverance, which I believe is an innate part of who I am now. I can remember coming home, and I got tons and tons of broken bones from this little pony. But I can remember every single time coming home from the hospital, from the emergency room, with a new bright white cast on, and my dad taking me out to the corral and saying, come on, you're going to get back up there. And I can remember how excited I was to start that journey all over, crawling up on Popsicle's back. And I learned more than just how to ride a horse. You know, with my prosthetic device, I could learn how to hold the reins, but I learned how to pick up a brush and a bridle and a saddle and a pitchfork and a bale of hay and a bucket and a wheelbarrow and all these key things. And that pony taught me about a hard day's work and what that meant to have a sense of accomplishment, I think well before the age of 8 years old. So I outgrew my pony, and next up was superhero number 2, Prince. And I can't say enough good things about this being right here that you're getting to look at. He was my best friend for 32 years, and he taught me all about unconditional love and friendship. And it was this little horse that every time he saw me, he'd come trotting across the pasture, and if I turned my back on him, he'd rub his head furiously on me, getting all of my attention. But it was really what happened to me was when I really figured out, wow, this is a pretty special being I'm getting to be around, was shortly after college. Someone asked me, hey, could you take your gelding and would you bring him out and would you lead him for a little boy who has Down syndrome? I said, sure, no problem, we can do that. And so it was there that I met Tim, who was 4 years old, and he wasn't walking or talking. And he showed up at the barn with his occupational therapist. And I watched this occupational therapist put this little boy on the back of that horse. And what I saw was amazing. I saw a little boy who suddenly was engaged and cooperating and smiling. And I watched the therapist position his fingers on the reins. And then shortly after, she took his fingers off the reins and had him sign horse right next to the helmet. Well, his mom lost it. She started crying because that was the first time he had ever had any kind of communication. When she started crying, Tim said, Mama. So now the dad's crying. So I was pretty moved in that moment about what this horse had done. And I looked at the horse, and I looked at Prince, and his head was down, and his eyes were soft. And I knew right then, in that very moment, that this horse had purpose. This horse knew exactly what he was doing. So I realized all these major milestones that had come to Tim, and maybe to me too, had all become about because of a horse. So what I had to think about right there in that moment was, had this ever happened to anybody else? Had anybody else just recognized what I had seen with the back of a horse? And so I started to get to work. I started to think, okay, this is really interesting. I started to study classical hippotherapy and therapeutic riding, and it was because of Prince that I started my first nonprofit for kids with all different kinds of diagnoses. And he helped me with my first summer camp, and Prince and I discovered that there was lots more Tims and lots more little Meggans out there. It was Prince who taught a young boy named Brody how to do a headstand on his back, giving him all kinds of confidence for the years to come. And it was Prince that taught a little boy named Travis, who had drowned in a creek and been resuscitated after a very long period of time, who suffered severe brain damage. It was Prince that gave that young man hope, and his parents told me that that was the only place that he had to go. So I started to wonder, how had I taken for granted this life-changing trail that Prince had me riding on? And so it was this horse who really taught me unlimited potential. When he passed away at 39 and a half years of age, I started to think about how this wise old gelding had carried hundreds of children on his back. And every single time he took great care with them, whether they had cancer, whether they had cerebral palsy, whether they had agenesis of the corpus callosum, whether they were on the spectrum for autism. Every single child, Prince had this incredible loyalty, this feeling of allegiance, of giving of himself, and he clearly had a sole course of action. This was this horse's path, and he spent his life serving children. And so I realized that Prince had taught me gratitude for every moment that I had spent with him, every ride I have been on together with him. So when he passed away, I was lost. I was just beyond consoling. I had realized that my best friend was gone, and I realized that I was running hippotherapy and therapeutic riding programs across the country, and I didn't know how I was going to get through it without my wingman, without my right-hand guy. And so I was thoroughly depressed, and I wasn't sure how I was going to pull through this. And that's when entered superhero number 3, Hank. So Hank is the total opposite of Prince, and he is extremely sensitive, and he can rate up and down in the moment with anyone. And I had owned him for years while I had Prince, but in my mind, Hank was probably the player on the bench during the game, saying, put me in, coach, put me in, I'm ready. And every time I put him in and used him with a session with a different person, he got better and better. He just kept hitting that three-pointer from the center court line. He seemed to swoop right in and help not just me recover, but all kinds of other people recover as well. He seemed to pick up where Prince had left off. And even though he was a little bit younger and he had a little bit more energy, I noticed that this superhero here had a great deal of things to teach individuals. I realized that a lot of my students that were already riding, Hank could now advance them exactly where Prince had left off. And I also learned something extremely important from this horse. I learned that horses can help children, and they can also heal a veteran. And so it was Hank who helped this young man who told me, there's no way I can ride a horse. I so want to, but there's no way I can. And when we transferred him from his wheelchair to the back of that horse, it took about 17 minutes. And that horse didn't move a muscle, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He was a total professional about it. And I realized that all the while he stood perfectly still to let that gentleman get on his back, that when that veteran picked up the set of reins and said, walk on, Hank left with intention and purpose. He knew exactly where he was going. It was Hank who took this young lady who was in a car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. Her younger sister was killed, and when she woke up from her coma, Prince was the one who helped her in her rehabilitation process. But it was really Hank who took her on to win her 6 gold medals at the Special Olympics. So you see, what I believe is that horses are there because they know our needs. They read us all the way deep down to the inside, and they know exactly the right time of when to come in and to rescue us right up. And Hank's ability to do that, in my mind, is truly unique. I've seen Hank rise to every single occasion I've ever given him. I'm forever aware of this horse, this animal, this superhero's eternal kindness that he radiates and this compassion that he always carries. His ears are always up. He's like your model employee. His tail is always wagging. He's always ready to go to work. And his breath, to me, it's like a whisper from God. He's steady. He's patient. He's the friend that you always wanted. Just last weekend, this is Hank, and that's a 74-year-old veteran that he's carrying in front of a crowd of 8,000 people at the Midwest Horse Fair. Veteran and Hank, they were flawless. And as I watched Hank last weekend and I thought about this talk today, I thought that horse, he knew he was carrying another hero. And he did so with an attitude that was always willing and always unshaken and always full of courage. Because I believe that these horses, they can take us to places that we never even knew we could go. Many times working with veterans, I hear veterans tell us again and again when they come to our farm to work with our horses that they're coming there because nothing else has worked. And the more advanced that we get with teaching veterans and working with horses and teaching them horsemanship, we see that more veterans are coming, and we see that more veterans are coming back more frequently. So we decided to take it a step further, right? Popsicle taught me, fear less, live more. And so why not? Why not take it to starting a program called Operation Mustang to let veterans from across the country gentle our wild Mustangs? And so this enters superhero number 4. He's not even named in this picture yet. He's a wild Mustang that we adopted. We got 4 wild Mustangs for our pilot program, and he was actually the wildest one of the bunch. So the picture that you're looking at here, he still has on his neck tag that the Bureau of Land Management put on him, but he's never been touched here. And what I want you to know about the Mustangs is that they are a totally raw, undomesticated horse, and that what happens with a Mustang here is that they have to overcome a great deal of trauma. And that little black Mustang, that little horse right here, he had plenty of trauma. So what happens with the Mustangs is that we know that in 2015, the numbers are in, that there's about 40,000 Mustangs that are running free. These horses run across about 10 of the western states in the United States. So there's 40,000 of those horses out there, and then we know there's another 50,000 that are standing in holding pens. And actually, all of us in this room right now are paying to feed those creatures. It all comes from taxpayers' money. Ranchers and government have decided that there's just too many horses, too many of these 50,000 horses that are running on lands on the western states. And so these horses are encroaching on private grazing lands. And because of that, the wild horses are being gathered up. And when I talk about a horse that has to deal with trauma, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures or videos of it, but the horses are actually gathered, they're watched, they're gathered with helicopters, they're rounded up, and they're put into holding chutes and pens. And they are removed from the land that they've known their whole lives, and they're removed from the herds that they've grown up with, from their families. And on top of that, if that's not traumatic enough, they're castrated, inoculated, and freeze-branded. So by the time they come for adoption, they've got a lot of baggage that we've got to try to help them through. These are some more of our new Mustangs that we've just gotten. But we also know that in looking at veterans and reading information that is out on veterans, that about 10 to 30% of all veterans, you can look at any era, any time frame, any war, but about 10 to 30% are dealing with some form of post-traumatic stress. We also know, in case you didn't, that there is an epidemic in this country that 22 veterans a day are taking their lives. So what we're doing in Operation Mustang is actually putting the horses, the wild Mustangs, and the veterans together. And we're watching how that through a gentling process, that the veteran and Mustang can discover trust and purpose and a partnership as they overcome trauma together. I have heard veterans with post-traumatic stress, with military sexual trauma, with traumatic brain injury, anxiety, depression, addiction, you name it. They tell me over and over again that they can identify themselves in that wild Mustang. The common traits: freedom and very heightened survival instincts. That's what a veteran and a wild Mustang share. Currently, we're working with 9 Mustangs and several hundred veterans from across the country, and we're using a process to gentle these horses and letting these horses and veterans find safety, hope, and harmony together. Mighty is what we ended up naming this little guy that I talked about, superhero number 4, and he's certainly mighty. He was actually one of the ones of the wild Mustangs in the pool of 50,000 that was set aside that no one would probably likely ever adopt him because of his age and because of the amount of trauma that he had come through. But I will tell you that after many months and after some incredible veterans pouring their hearts into working with this lovely creature, he has come leaps and bounds. And because of that, this horse, he shows us that it is possible to create new possibilities. That a Mustang, we know they see us for who we are. That this horse, when we work with him, he requires us to give him our all because they're so raw and they're so hyper-vigilant that they require you to slow down and to stay in the moment. We know that the Mustangs, they have the ability to change. We know that when you're working with a Mustang, you have to trust them, and in response, then they will trust you. So the Mustangs require us to be soft, patient, to be confident leaders. We know that we have to be centered, and we have to be confident and have to have a positive mental frame. Every time we step in the pen with them, we can't do it half-hearted. When you decide to get into work with a Mustang, you have to be all in. And we know that every horse, every wild horse that we work with, we work so hard to get the littlest change, positive change, that everything we do with them is truly earned. And so a veteran and a Mustang can really form a very unique and deep bond. They say that horses are a mirror of who we are, but I have this theory that if that's true, then the Mustang, they're like the 20x mirror, the one that can see all the way through your pores. They clearly see you, who you are, and they tell you who you are and how you come across. Mighty is now an ambassador, and he represents other Mustangs, and he shows veterans and all of us that the end is worth it. Mighty recently went to a nursing home to grant a woman her final wish before she passed away, that she wanted to be able to touch a horse. She just didn't realize we were going to bring her a wild horse. This is Mighty working in an outpatient clinic. He's able to roll a ball up to this young man that's getting occupational therapy. And I don't think Mighty ever got to go to a nursing home or walk in an outpatient clinic in the wild. But he's able to do this now because he's overcome trust and he has a clear purpose. We hear veterans tell us time and time again from working with the horses that the horses are able to save their lives. So 22 veterans a day who take their lives. 22 people who think that they can't escape the pain. If that was 22 football players, if that was 22 senators, if that was one senator, it would be national news. This is clearly an epidemic, and we believe by putting veterans and horses together that it's possible. Changes are possible. Horses have always made history possible. They are the catalyst for change. And when I was 4, I really had no idea that superheroes could come in all shapes and sizes. I just thought they were the ones in the cartoons. but I clearly know now that they come from the shadows and they appear when you least expect them. And I definitely know for me that a superhero, they come with a mane and a tail, and that they have the gentlest heart that you could have ever met. You know, a horse is a wonderful thing. They don't lie. They don't hold grudges. They don't see right and wrong. They just simply live in the moment, and they meet our needs. So the horse just says, bring me who you are, and I'll meet you halfway. These horses, they show me daily that I'm part of something much bigger than myself. And when I get to see our horses work so many ways with so many people and do something that no drugs, no doctors, no therapies, no surgeries, no individuals can duplicate, it makes me recognize that these horses, they're certainly worthy of the title superhero. This is Hank, and I don't really think we've scratched the surface of what our horses are possible to doing. I've seen it in my life hundreds and thousands of times in moments where they've brought out people's greatness. Superheroes like Popsicle, Prince, Hank, and Mighty are deeply embedded in my heart. I believe these horses are change agents, and they're undeniably superheroes. And they've helped me view my life not just from a heightened perspective, but also from an expanded perspective. And they've certainly always taught me to fear less and live more.